Okay, I'm just going to untie the stern. Okay, welcome to White Sand Lake. Just for your knowledge, these cabins that were down here, except the one on the end, were built in 1920. So they're over 100 years old. The house on the end, we took down an old cabin and built our house to conform with the other ones. So that has been there about 20 years. Not quite 20 years.
Was this always a resort? That's what it was built to be?
Has been in the family and has been a resort ever since 1923, when my wife's grandfather sold the property on a land contract to his sister's husband, and he ran it as a resort. The old lodge sat up on the where the tent is right now, the white tent, in that general area, more like where the gazebo is, and operated the resort for a number of years. And he had a gambling problem. He'd make money in the summertime, go to Chicago, blow all the money, and then have to start all over again. So eventually he defaulted on the land contract, and the property went back to Gus Peterson and Olga Peterson, and they didn't want to sell it to my mother-in-law, his daughter, because he saw what his son-in-law, a sort of relative anyway, had done with the property and discouraged them from buying it, but they were determined to make the resort a go. So they bought it from him in 1934 and started operating in 1935 as a boys' camp. If you can imagine, middle of the Depression, they're running a boys' camp. And everybody hear me okay? Okay. All right. So they ran it as a boys' camp. And of course, 1935, there weren't too many boys going to camp unless their name was Rockefeller or something notable like that. So they decided to turn it into a resort complex, and they ran it as a resort from 1936 on. And then my wife's sister and her husband joined the operation in 1959. Their last name was Lohr, so Santra and Sue are sisters. And they're both still living, but they're retired and enjoying their late 80s. This property all along this shoreline was purchased in 1918 by the Peterson brothers. There were 4 of them. And they decided they would divide it up amongst themselves. And Gus Peterson, my wife's grandfather and grandmother, chose the peninsula. And the others chose parcels from here all the way into the bay. And they developed them into resorts as well. So we have really 2 other resorts here. This is known as Timber Bay Resort, and the other resort back down here is called White Sand Lake Resort. They're still working it. At one time we had 15 resorts like this on this lake. But over the years, people found that the land was more valuable than what they were earning of running a resort complex, because they only ran them basically during 3 seasons, spring, summer, and fall. So all this property once owned by the Peterson brothers. The 3 brothers eventually sold this land off to other parties, and they took over those resorts that were present. And these are the only 3 remaining resorts on the whole lake. The other 12 resorts failed. They all decided it was better to subdivide and get rid of the property. At one time we owned this land over here. We had 1,800 feet of frontage and about 54 acres of property. This goes way, way, way back, about 1,800 feet. The only one that's not developed is this land right in front of us. That belongs to my son. When we divided up the property, members of the family chose which parcel they wanted. This was called Picnic Point because at one time, when we were serving meals, one day a week we'd bring everybody over here for breakfast. The chef would come over early, start a fire, and they'd have scrambled eggs and ham, and we'd bring them over here by pontoon boat. And there were picnic tables up there on the rise and stairs going up, and we had a pier here. And then we'd shuttle them back and forth for about 2.5 hours so that everybody got their breakfast. But that was labor intensive. They sure enjoyed it, but it was a lot of work. Took a half a day by the time we got set up and then tore down. And then it was time for lunch. So that didn't last as long as we'd hoped it would. We'll swing through the bay here. We'll show you a little of the houses. This at one time was all undeveloped. But after we sold this property, there were other parcels that were available. So people have built some very, very nice summer homes. They're not used very much. Some of these homes are, you know, they're worth several $1 million, and they only come up a half a dozen times a year. A couple of weeks ago when we were in this area, we had 5 eagles in here. There must have been some dead fish on the water, but they were up on top of these dead birch trees. The birch trees that don't have any branches or leaves, they're just posts. They were all perched up on there, swooping down and picking up fish. So you see some very nice homes. Again, most of them are pulling all their boats out of the water this time of year. They take out the piers, they take out the shore stations, which are holding the boats out of the water, and they tuck them away for winter. So within the next 3 or 4 weeks, there won't be anything on the shoreline. Everybody will have pulled their boats out. The water is only 8 feet deep where we're at. Right there, it's about 1.5 feet. So we're going to bypass that sandbar. You can tell the sandbars because of the reeds growing out of them. So when you see reeds like that, you don't want to try and cross over those sandbars unless you want to leave your propeller behind. Say again?
You said 8 feet deep?
It's only 2.5 feet deep now.
What's the deepest the lake is?
Way down the lake. You can take a look at this map and you'll see where the deepest point is. It's down beyond this point, down about a mile. So way to your right, where your right hand is, there's a point there that sticks out. Right there, just beyond that, is 63 feet deep. Generally, overall, the lake is about 35 to 40 feet deep in general.
Is it
Spring-fed. These lakes were all created by the last glacier age, about 10,000 years ago, when the glacier that went all the way down to the area of Neenah, Manassas, Appleton, that area there, then it stopped. And then it started to recede. And as it receded, it gouged huge holes in the ground. So this at one point was a giant ice cube that went 63 feet down into the earth. And over time, over hundreds of years, it melted and created these lakes. Now we have 126 lakes right here in this township. This township is only 12 miles square, 144 square miles. A lot of it is water. There's the Powell Marsh just to the north of us here, and then these lakes were all formed by the ice breaking off at the front of the glacier and gouging into the ground. This county has 1,300 lakes in it, Vilas County. And just south of us is Oneida County. Oneida County has another 1,300 lakes. So within those two counties, we have 2,600 lakes of any size. Doesn't include all the little ink pots and the little puddles that you see along the road. Those are in addition to the lakes that you see. The largest lake, Fence Lake, is not far from here. It's probably about 4 miles as the eagle flies. It's over 3,000 acres. Trout Lake, there's North Trout and Little Trout. That lake is about 4,000 acres. The land that we're looking at behind Gary here, you notice there's very little development on it. And that, here I'll pass this around. That's because when the people bought it in 1923, a bunch of very wealthy businessmen from Chicago, they decided they didn't want to have anything built on that shoreline. So they put, I'll pass it around this way, they put it in something called a land trust. which means they'll never have anything built on it, ever. They've locked up that property so that they cannot build a cabin or any kind of a structure. So all of that shoreline, from out of view here, clear around that point, which is called Catfish Point, and down around that corner, will never be developed. The only development is a property that you'll see about 11 o'clock off the bow of the boat here. You'll see some cabins in there. There are 12 cabins. There's a large dining hall. It's run very much like American Planned Resort, but only from Memorial Day until Labor Day. They bring in a staff, a chef and a sous chef, wait staff, housekeepers, and for 3 months, June, July, and August, they operate 3 meals a day and they have full services. Then, as soon as Labor Day comes, the staff leaves, they pull all the piers in, they pull all the boats in, and they put them into storage. And if the people want to come up during the fall or the spring, they're on their own. They have to mix their own meals. So these are cottages, but basically they're much more than cottages. These are beautiful summer homes, but they look like cottages. And they declare them as cottages for tax reasons. So all this land, you would think there's huge taxes on it. Because they put it into a land trust, they pay a very low percentage of tax on it. It's like forest crop management. If you're familiar with forest crop management, you sign a contract saying you're never going to build on it. They take the assessed value of undeveloped land and reduce the taxes down to 25% of the value of that land. So how do they pay the taxes? They log off the mature trees. So there are logging trails in these woods, and during the winter, only during the winter, so they don't disturb anybody, every 4 or 5 years they come in and they log off the mature trees, the maples, the oaks, the pine, the popple, and all that, and they sell it to logging operations. So you never even know they're here. So there are walking trails back there. They don't allow any other motorized vehicles back there except the logging trucks. So you can see by that green line around the lake, all that shoreline is protected forever. So we'll never see any development here, which is great for us because we're not going to be looking at piers every 100 or every 200 feet. Gives us a wonderful view, and the fact that we aren't going to have that many more boats on the lake or what have you.
And that's open to the public then, or only that family or this friend?
There are 12 families, and it's available to their families and invited guests. They have year-round caretakers. There's a young couple in their mid-20s that just took over last year, and it's their responsibility to take care of the land and make sure that nobody's in there that shouldn't be. They live there year-round.
So how did that get to be? Was that when they did the land trust? Was that already there, or was that part of the family?
No, this was all owned by Native Americans. Or what happened in 1854, the state of Wisconsin, it was formed in 1848. But in 1854, the federal government declared this an Indian reservation.
So this whole lake was originally on
Right.
the Indian reservation.
So it was either federal land or in 1888, the president at that time, President Harrison, said it wasn't fair that Native Americans couldn't own their own land, that they had to be placed on reservations and have common property. So they passed the Allotment Act of 1888 so that every individual Indian could own their own parcel of land.
Okay.
So about 2/3 of the reservation was divided up and given to individual Indians. And about 1/3 of it was held in trust by the federal government, could never be sold. It's always going to be federal property. So the individual Indians now had the right to buy or sell their property. And many of them chose to keep their property, still in their families. There might be 200 descendants in a century or century and a half. And it's very difficult to sell it without the authority of the majority of the family. It takes a long time to do that. Way back when, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was easy because there was just one Indian or a couple that owned the property. And that's how a lot of this property was purchased. Camp Whippagackie bought this property, most of it in 1923, exactly 100 years ago. and they paid about $3 a frontage foot. They bought all this property for $56,000. It's worth millions right now. But it's never going to be developed. It's never going to be sold. But it's being held for them to be used for hiking, whatever.
Yep.
A number of years ago, back in the 80s, a suggestion was made that we run a workshop on this property at this time of year and go pick mushrooms and identify mushrooms. So we had a mushroom identification workshop that lasted 5 days with 2 professors from the University of Michigan, Nancy Weber and her father. I think Mr. Weber's probably passed away, but I think Nancy Weber's still teaching at the university. And we had 25 people take the workshop. We put a pontoon boat in down there near the island, and we gave everybody a garbage bag and gloves, plastic gloves, okay? Because some mushrooms, as you know, are poisonous. Even if you touch them, the toxins will go through your skin. And we were very careful about, they could take whatever they wanted. We took them back to the main lodge, the old main lodge. Everybody had a banquet table, an 8-foot banquet table. And we spread them all out. And then their job was to identify all the mushrooms they had picked. And the ones that they could identify that were edible, the chef at that time prepared them as an appetizer before dinner. Because we were serving 3 meals a day. We were serving up to 600 meals a day on top of what we're doing now. Yeah, it was a lot of work. But it was a big hit. And the mushrooms that were dangerous, we disposed of. And the other ones, they identified. And the ones that were edible, we sauteed and had them with dinner.
So then is that land that's built on, is that still native land? Still native families? Or is that
No, these are very, very well-to-do families from the Chicago area, generally.
Including those 2?
Pardon me?
That little area over there too?
That's where their houses are. That's where the 12 cottages are, a dining hall, and they also have boats. They have a fleet of sailboats.
So, and that's owned by the people in Chicago?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
now I'm with you.
I don't know if R.R. Donnelly Press makes any sense to you. The Donnellys were one of the original buyers. The Elliott family, there's a bunch of them that were in different professions. Some of them were in heavy equipment, like International Harvester. So those families were the ones that bought in, and only 2 families in that period of time have sold out, and other families have bought in. So it's a legacy. They're hanging on to it.
Yep, okay.
Every family has a Lightning sailboat. They were made during World War II. So everybody has exactly the same sailboat, and they have a regatta every Sunday afternoon during the summer. So they get out. It's a big deal. Before Sunday dinner, they set out buoys out here in this bay, and they race around them for about 3 hours, and then whoever wins it gets a traveling trophy. And it's a big deal at dinner. But it's a camaraderie. And every Saturday night, every Saturday night they have a barbecue right down in the low area there. They have a barbecue, and all the families get together, and the chef cooks steaks and hamburgers or whatever you want. We've been invited over there several times to join in the fun, which is really a lot of fun. Prior to Camp Whippagackie buying some of this property here, it did belong to Native Americans. One family was known as the Catfish family, a man and his wife and 2 kids. They had a cottage towards the end of this point. That cottage is now cabin number 5, which is up on top of the rise. So as you're walking back towards the lodge, you'll see a cabin on the right-hand side that has hand-hewn logs on 2 sides. Yep. In April of 1934, the FBI raided Little Bohemia, where the Dillinger gang would go just to get away from the city. Yep. So the FBI raided Little Bohemia, and John Dillinger and Babyface Nelson, all the rest of the gang dispersed. They took off. And you have that one map? Okay. Babyface Nelson decided he was going to, on foot, get away. He did take a car. He stole the car from Little Bohemia, which is way up here on Highway 51. And he dropped the car off at the intersection of H and Highway 51. You go right by that tonight if you go to the art gallery. And then he walked down Highway H, which is this highway right here, okay? But he got to a certain point, he said, I've got to get off the highway. It's dark out, April, snow on the ground. He's in a three-piece suit with wingtip shoes. That's all he's got. No gloves, no hat, no coat. So he comes across this property, which is all marshland. So he's up to his knees in marshland. And he ends up on this point, and he comes across the cottage that's owned by the catfishes, and he holds them hostage for 3 days. He's got 3 revolvers, and he says, you guys are not going anywhere. We're going to wait till you get out of here. After 3 days, he's had no sleep. So he trades clothes with the Native American. He said, okay, you give me your clothes, I'm going to give you mine. So the Indian got this brand new 3-piece suit, wet, but nevertheless good suit. And Babyface Nelson has the Native American take him out of this road here, all the way out to Highway 47, way out here. The road runs around this lake, out to Highway 47, which is going towards Mercer. There he hijacks a car and gets back to Chicago in a car that he'd hijacked from somebody on the highway. So he lives the rest of that year, but eventually he gets killed later that year in Chicago. He's only 26 years old. And so the Native American in that house says, we got to move into the town. We don't like living here in the middle of nowhere where these gangsters will come in and hold us hostage. So he puts the property up for sale, the house up for sale, and my father-in-law buys it from him. And his father-in-law was a lumberjack, so they move it across the lake right here.
In the winter, or they pull it in the summer?
Well, they took it apart. They took it apart like Lincoln logs, labeled it all, put it on a big horse-drawn sleigh, dragged it over there, put it up on top of the hill, reconstructed it, and since that time, it has grown about 3 times the size that it was. You can see how big it is if you look at the 2 sides.
Yep.
There was a porch, and then there was another bedroom added, another bathroom. They had no bathrooms inside, no kitchens. They don't cook inside of the building because if they have a fire, they lose the whole building.
Yep.
So they had a little area where they did all their cooking outside. Same thing with the bathroom. They had outhouses. So that building, of course, has been altered quite a bit, but we still leave the facade there. It's kind of fun. I'm going to go by an eagle's nest, and then, what time is it? 1:45. I'm not sure where Todd is with his boat. Maybe up that shoreline. You over there? So from here to the far end of the lake, it's about 1.5 miles. Behind us, the lake runs down to the east and takes a turn, another turn, and it ends up at the intersection of H and D, which you'll pass tonight. There used to be 5 Native American encampments on this lake. So there were small little villages, and the only way they get around was to hike it or take canoes. And those villages eventually just dispersed. They all moved into town or whatever. And the lakes in this area were connected by hand-dug canals. So the Native Americans figured they had to get from White Sand Lake into Sunfish Lake, into Big Crooked Lake, what have you. So they figured out a way of digging canals that were about 8 feet wide. A lot of work. But that's how they got around from one place to another.
So they actually made the chain they chained them together.
Yep.
It's pretty original. When did they do that?
That was probably in the late 1800s. There are some, there's a gentleman up here that's put the whole program together about all the canals. You could go by water all the way up to Manitowish Waters by going from one lake to another. Can't do it today.
Those canals.
I mean,
They're still using those.
no, they've all grown over. The only one that we can use is the one that goes into Head Flyer Lake.
Oh, okay.
If you go down the shoreline of our lake, you'll see an opening going into a small little lake, a 17-acre lake. Cottage on top of the hill is where my son-in-law and my daughter live. This at one time was Indian owned. Then a fellow who had a hardwood lumber business bought it, and then my father-in-law bought it from him. So this property here is a beautiful piece of property, about 300 feet of frontage, and it's an old building that was built back in the 20s. Now there's an eagle's nest in that one pine tree that stands the very highest here, just directly off the port side. You see an opening in the trees, and then there's an eagle's nest right there. Now the eagles are not there right now. They're probably flying around or sitting in one of these local trees. But they'll come back and use that nest. But there was an eaglet born in the spring who now is already fletched and is flying around looking for a place for him to make a house.
We saw two on the branch there yesterday.
Oh, did you?
Whiteheads.
Okay.
Big ones.
So that's probably the pair that mated with the little one. So they hang around here, and they watch the young one that first year, and then he's on his own, or she's on her own. But they like to hang around in these big trees and then feed off the fish that are in the shallow water. We're only in, how much water? Well, we're 6 feet deep here, but it'll get shallow real quick.
We went on that Raven Road.
Oh, Raven Lake Road? Yeah.
Raven Lake Road, and we saw a whole flock of turkey vultures, but two eagles flying with them. They were
Okay.
all together. I'd never seen that.
Well, the eagles were probably waiting for one of them to get injured or something and feed on a turkey dinner. But Raven Lake Road is a Native American road. We're now in about less than a foot of water. And I better pull the prop up. You can see how clear the lake is, and this is in the fall when much of the vegetation is decaying.
It is so clear.
Is the lake freeze solid in the winter?
4 feet thick. We have 4 feet of ice on this lake, so this is all solid ice
You get much fish kill?
during the winter. Pardon me?
You get much fish kill? Is there not
No,
oxygen?
they go out in deep water because out in the middle of this bay it's 40 or 50 feet deep. So they migrate out to that area. The larger fish actually hibernate during the winter time. Right now the muskies are feeling the water getting cold, and the northerns are. So they'll get frantic. They'll have a feeding frenzy, and they'll fatten up. So the large female muskies will put on a lot of weight, and then they basically do what bears do. They go down to the bottom of the lake and they just sit there. They don't burn any energy. They're just there. They already have all the food supply they need. They may occasionally come to the surface. The Native Americans ice fish on these lakes, so they would be. Where's my reeds? I got to keep an eye on the sandbar here. They use a carved wooden bait that's curved on a string, and they cut holes in the ice, lay evergreen boughs, and they lay on them, and then they use this little lure to attract the muskies. And then when the muskie does come underneath this hole, they'll spear them. Today they spear them with metal spears, but way back then they were wooden spears before they were using metal. So these are all residences. There's really not much property that belongs to the tribe anymore or individual Indians. There are a few pieces of property that are, but this end of the lake is a little bit more developed than the area that we're near. So there's a road that goes around. How many people went to Harrison's the other night? The restaurant? Nope. It's just on the other side of that tree line, because there's a creek that runs from this lake into Pokegama Lake, a similar sized lake, but it's not navigable. Our lake is 30 feet higher than Pokegama Lake. So the water runs downhill, but you can't navigate it. You can't even walk it. It's a real tight quarters. If you go to Harrison's Pub, you'll see the little creek. It's pretty much low water right now because there hasn't been a whole lot of rainfall. with the runoff in the spring, the snow and the ice, then you get a pretty good trickle going through there, but you can't navigate it.
There's a road that goes out of the parking lot area, and then it goes off to the right and travels along the lakeside here.
Right along here.
Does that go to Harrison's?
No. No, well, it doesn't have a dead end, but it goes over private property, and they kind of stop any traffic going over that way. But there's a road down here called West Sand Lake Lodge Lane. So you can get there by coming over here and turning back and going up this way. There's Todd over there. So all this shoreline again belongs to Camp Whippagackie. All the way to where Todd's boat is right now, in line with that boat, there is a canal that goes into Sunfish Lake. And 10 years ago, my wife and I and a friend tried to get in there, and we had a golden retriever in a canoe. We got there, but again, we were walking in muck up to our knees, and by the time we got out of the water, we had all kind of leeches on our legs, and then once we got there, we had to come back. So we were actually laying on our backs in the canoes and using the branches of the trees that were hanging over to pull ourselves.
That was an overgrown canal.
Yeah, it was just, the trees just
Sure.
formed a canopy over the water, and it was in the summer, so it was low water, and the dog got out of the canoe, which wasn't much fun because he got into the mud. He couldn't go anywhere. He wouldn't walk. Anyway,
I suppose, do leeches attach to dogs too?
they can. Of course, they've got more hair than we do,
Right.
but
So you have to give them a check.
well, you have to check them over and make sure you get them off. Yeah, we wouldn't do that again. That's the last time we do that. We did it, but not again. In the summertime, we used to give snorkeling tours here. My wife and I are scuba divers, and Todd and Stephanie are divers. And we had all kinds of snorkels and masks and fins. We'd set everybody up, and people who wanted to do it would come out here, and there's a gravel and sandbar right in front of us. So we'd anchor the pontoon boat, and we'd snorkel around the shoreline, and the fish were attracted to us. So the fish would swim right up to us to see what was there. We have rock bass and smallmouth bass and occasionally a muskie come up to us. We don't do it anymore. We lost all that equipment in that fire of '92. We thought, well, okay, we're not going to do that again. But that was a lot of fun. So we're very fortunate to have all this native shoreline. And we don't look at piers every 100 feet and summer homes. It's a little bit different going down here, but most of these were built with 200 feet of frontage. They changed the laws to say that you had to have 200 feet of frontage to build a house as opposed to 100 feet. So we're pretty lucky there. Right now we're in 4 feet of water. And as we go around the point, it gets quite a bit shallower. How are we doing time-wise?
Yeah, are you dropping us at the same spot?
No, you're just going to swim back.
Got it. No, I meant right by the lodge, or right where we got.
There are 2 boats on those pier already. I wouldn't be able to dock. There's two of our pontoon boats there, but I've got a car down there. We can give people a ride back, and I think there's at least one golf cart down there.
Was the resort always this big? You say there was a fire. Was it bigger or smaller or what?
Well, the previous main lodge was 15,000 square feet. The lodge we're in now is about 12,000 square feet. So we built it smaller. We built it smaller but smarter. The old lodge had 3 levels. This one only has 2.
But all the cabins are original?
Yeah. Well, the chalet is not original. That was built 20 years ago. The North Shore building was built 92, same year as the fire, so that's 30 years old. But the rest of the cabins are probably built in the early 1900s up until maybe 1940. So they've been redone, but the exterior is pretty much all the same.
How many people can stay at once?
We can handle 225 people at one time.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
It's nice too because they're so spread out that you don't feel like you're with a lot of people.
Right, right.
Nice setup.
So this is excellent musking fishing area right here. There's at least one boat out there today. And again, the muskies start getting mad. I say mad. They they go after anything that's moving. We have whitefish in this lake, or ciscos. You familiar with whitefish? Whitefish are in the Great Lakes, excellent eating, and they like extremely cold water. So the water on the bottom of this lake is a constant 52 degrees.
Is it spring-fed?
Spring-fed. So all the water coming into this lake is coming up from underground springs.
It's nice to be on a lake that doesn't have a lot of boat traffic.
Yep.
Oh,
4th of July, the lake is pretty busy, but other than that, we don't have, there's only one landing that's a tribal landing at the far end of the lake, and it's very small and hard to get in and out of. So it really limits the amount of boats that come into the lake.
Also, you don't really have much public.
No, no. Camp Whippagackie has its own landing. We have one. That's it. On Saturday. Okay, here.
bye-bye.
Let me tie off this rear line.